What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO and Eddy here to talk about the meta implications of Ashe and Bob coming to the game soon. We've watched the pros and top-level streamers play her a ton and played her a bunch ourselves, and I gotta say, she's an incredibly fun hero to play, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to be viable. But the good news is, I think we're both in agreement that she's probably an S-tier pick right away, which is a really big deal.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that the things that she does, the depth of play that you can get out of her kit with TNT Coach Gun and her main Viper weapon means that players who can really get to the bottom of that kit and explore all the different things that she can do will really be able to take over games in a way that we haven't really seen in Overwatch before. A little word of caution though, there are easy parts of her kit. TNT is easy to leverage, and if you can do that, then I think she starts to become viable lower down the skill distribution. But I think it's those top players who can really make use of her mobility and her hit scan aim we're going to really see dominate.
Well, the thing is, when we talk about a DPS hero scaling to the different parts of ranked, everyone at a specific tier is going to have a similar skill set anyway. So you're playing like with like most of the time. And in comparison to the other aim-intensive heroes, I don't think Ashe is more dominant on her weapon, actually, as opposed to like a Widowmaker, whereas she has these big, powerful cooldowns that will help her be used at all tiers of play, but I think even more specifically in certain meta matchups where TNT brings something to Overwatch that, if you think about it, we really haven't seen before. And what I would relate it to is in MOBA games, they would call this type of character a nuker or assassin, I think in Heroes of the Storm, where they're glass, obviously, but they have the potential to just unload tons of damage. And you might think to like Hanzo or Junkrat, these type of characters definitely have cooldowns that are really strong. Like you can throw a Junkrat mine to do 120. Storm Arrow puts 6 arrows on deck that if you hit them, they can add up to a lot of damage. But TNT has a massive AoE and could potentially burn the whole team from somewhere between 130 and 175. And if you hit multiple targets, that's upwards of like 800 to 1,000 damage. I mean, there's few things in the entire game that can rival that amount of damage output, which makes me excited for her matchup specifically against team comps that want to clump together. You watch a lot of the Overwatch World Cup, you've seen that those death ball styles of play are really strong, and now we have a damage counterpart that can go head to head with some of that AoE healing that's been so strong in the game right now. I don't necessarily want to say like she's a straight up GOAT's counter, but finally I think we're adding damage elements to the game that counteracts the shielding and healing that's been buffed and introduced in the recent like months and last year.
From watching Effect and from playing a lot of other FPSs in the past, specifically Call of Duty and things like that, there are a lot of plays that Ashe can make that I saw Effect do, particularly with the TNT. Let's focus on that for a moment. So quite often Effect would use the TNT as soon as the cooldown came online, and he'd use it to what I would call, if you've ever played Call of Duty, it's specifically Search and Destroy, like stun checking corners. Like instead of just walking blind into a corridor or a corner where you think someone might be, the TNT has an excellent use to sort of check that corner for you. And it forms this sort of taking space utility for a damage hero that hasn't really been in the game before in quite such a direct way. And I think that's something that's really key to her character, is that she not only controls the space that she can take, but she controls the space that enemies can take. And you're right, specifically against those comps that like to take space as a large group, a cooldown that can hit all of them at one time can push them back, can check for threats, all that kind of stuff. That's a really unique part of her kit. We'll see that develop more over time. I think that's a way to get quite good value with her, and it is a piece of advice that I would give anyone trying to learn Ashe when she first comes out.
I'm kind of blown away by the design of the hero, because although we've spoke to Michael Chu about this as well, that she's a hero that was born out of the lore, but the balance of her seems to fit right into the type of thing the game needs, which really excites me. Now, we spoke a lot about TNT, and the reason is I think it's her best cooldown. I mean, conversely, the best next thing I can think of that can hit an AoE like that is like Anti-Nade, actually, and the more abilities we stack in this regard, the less effect that Death Ball comps are going to have. But also, even if you think to other DPS matchups that Ashe might be getting into, her weak ones are heroes that aren't as big in the meta right now, and her strengths, I think, are quite good against heroes that you would say are pretty strong right now. For example, against Doomfist, a lot of heroes have a big problem. You compare Ashe to a character like McCree, he's all in on getting that stun, whereas you kind of want a hero that can jump away, and even Hanzo or Widowmaker can feel unable to get away from Doomfist if he closes the distance because their mobility is a bit more situational. Hanzo's gets buffed if he can run up a wall, and Widowmaker, of course, needs a ledge to effectively get anywhere. There's a delay because she has to attach to the wall. Coach Gun from Ashe is immediate, knocks the target away, and knocks her back, or potentially gives her a Winston leap into the sky. Any of these things can be used to dodge a character like Doomfist, and once you do that one shake and bake maneuver to parry back, then you can start landing your major impact ADS shots, and that, I think, is a huge deal. Whereas, I think the characters should be weaker against are the smaller flanker characters. Remember those? They used to be really strong in the game. Genji and Tracer are much harder to hit for Ashe, and her Coach Gun, is, I think, has a bit of a lessened effect against them, because Doom, he needs to be able to connect physically with you, so the boop is a much bigger deal, whereas against Tracer, she's got 3 blinks anyway. Sure, the TNT does more than enough damage to kill her, but if you're able to recall and not die from the TNT, that's kind of her best cooldown. Also, at least for now, Ashe's head hitbox is massive, so Genji or Tracer are really going to be able to lay into that and delete her, I think, at close range. So the balancing of Ashe seems to be in a good place, and I don't think she'll be unchecked in the meta, but what I'm most interested in is her ability to at least force other heroes to sort of come out of the woodwork and start seeing more play again.
Yes, and an excellent example of that, I feel, is Mercy. The mash combo might be one of the strongest combos in the game, actually, even challenging Pharmacy, because what Damage Amp does for Ashe is turn her regular shots from a 2-shot to the head within its most viable range into a 1-shot, and it does a lot for TNT as well. That combo specifically is almost a must pick, in my opinion, because it does so much for her. It does more for Ashe than it ever did for Widow, in my opinion. And actually, I think Widow was one of Ashe's potential weak matchups. Any character that has to aim down sight is susceptible to being caught off guard by Widow taking an angle. Obviously, that's part of Ashe's playstyle as well. But I really feel that with a Mercy pocket, that pretty much just evens the matchup. They're both going to one-shot each other in the head, and I think that Ashe has a few advantages, obviously being TNT. She can take her own space and control where you can be much more effectively than Widow. The mash combo is something that we're all going to have to get used to, and I think for Mercy players, that's really positive. You know, there's a real reason to pick that hero because I think that combo is going to be very, very strong.
In some ways, I think it might upset the Mercy players that want to see her reworked to be a bit more fun to play, but in terms of overall strength, I have to agree. I think Mercy Ashe may be the most devastating Mercy pocket combo we've ever seen, because damage amping that, as you say, deletes Widow, and if you think about the way the maps play out, most maps, you don't need a Widow scope in order to set up these really long lines of sight. It's not really how the game plays. It's mostly at medium range, so if you can get that one-shot kill with Ashe anyway, why not just run her and have similar cooldowns in terms of mobility? I believe Coach Gun and Grapple are at 10 seconds. I have to double check that, but they're at least similar, and well, with Ashe, you're better against tanks because you have Coach Gun, which is more flexible, can boop away dive tanks, and TNT is all around one of the best cooldowns in the game. Maybe even the best in the entire game, because it is okay in duels. I wouldn't say it's great, but as you say, you can stun check around corners or throw it against a fleeing enemy, but even not for that, you can always just bomb it over a Rhine shield, and it just gets tons of value that way. If it hits 1 to 3 targets, it's getting money, whereas there's not that many damage heroes in the game that can just freely launch cooldowns like that out that will get repeated value. Usually they're far more situational, even you throw a Junkrat mine and you knock somebody around, and then all of a sudden you've lost the game because Reinhardt now has a free Earth Shatter angle or something, right? There's few damage abilities that can just spam out. Hanzo Storm Arrow is one of them, but even then, you have to hit it very carefully, and it does more with criticals. The burn, baby, burn TNT is a serious threat, and when it's damage amped, Ashe really can pressure angles and just force DPS play onto the game in a way that I think many FPS fans will be excited to see after tank play has been dominant for so long.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the most interesting aspects of her to me, I mentioned it earlier, is this kind of dexterity. So we're talking about TNT in these terms of like how many different ways you can use it. And just the fact that we're talking like that should tell you something about the power of the ability. When you're throwing it over shields to get at tanks. And also, let's not forget that I think that makes her matchup with Brig in particular much better than, say, other snipers, because being able to throw the TNT above or around a Brig shield isn't that difficult at all. And Brig suddenly becomes quite scared of you, I think. As a side note to that, I just want to say that matchup is particularly good for Ashe because I don't think it's really excusable with Coach Gun to ever be caught in the range where Brig should be able to kill you. One of the most defining characteristics about Ashe is her ability to control where a fight takes place, and she dictates the terms a lot of the time, and that's not something that a character like Brig really likes. You shouldn't be caught out by her. You've got TNT. You should be able to match up against her very, very well, and I don't think that's true of the other sniper characters in the game. Sure, Widow can run away from her, but shields are kind of Widow's enemy, and the whole point about the dexterity of Ashe's kit is that it allows her to get around these limitations of characters who you could compare her to. I think that's why I in particular think she's so strong.
So you might be thinking to yourselves, we're hyping up Ashe so much, does she have hard counters? Well, the first limitation, of course, is that she is difficult to play. So regardless of how powerful she can be, just clicking heads, of course, is a very difficult thing to do. But I think it's difficult on just about any hero. And ultimately, to me, it's almost as if they took a character like Hanzo, who we thought was this outrageous damage-dealing character with one-shot kill potential, and moved him over to a hit scan role with an AoE damage ability, really widening the field for DPS options. Because of that, normally I think Hanzo fares quite well at medium range engagements against just about every character. Maybe it's a bit fair of a match between him and Widow, especially if she has a Mercy. But up against Ashe, I mean, with a Mercy, she could just quick scope you and delete you. So all that time you're drawing that bow back, he's just dead. Whereas when you're up against a character like Widow, she has to scope up and charge. She's not doing a bunch of jumping around and evasive maneuvers. Ashe, I think, kind of robs Hanzo of what he was really good at. And in many ways, I struggle to find where he'll be needed once we have Ashe into the game, but we'll have to see more of that as everything develops. What she could be weak to a bit is Widowmaker at really long lines of sight, because it is more difficult to shoot without the zoom that Widowmaker can get. The only problem is, in every other engagement, medium range and close range, you'd think that Ashe is preferred, because she can just do more and is quicker on the draw with her one-shot kill ability on squishies. This may see dive comp be a bit better overall. Of course, there's always Brigitte waiting in the wings in order to make that difficult, but TNT getting launched at Brigitte against any type of comp, it controls the space, and the only way you can counter it is D.Va eating it. Now, 3-3 comps, of course, do run D.Va, but as long as you play around that just like you would with an anti-nade, you've got a serious damage ability that is going to hit multiple targets, and when damage amped, I mean, look out. There's some other things that I think people may not have been thinking about with why Ashe is good against tanks, and one of them is you can look right to a character like McCree, who's only got 6 shots available. Yeah, of course, he's got the roll to cancel, but Ashe, she has this ammo capacity that puts her at long stretches of downtime for her to reload, but that's a good thing because it puts the power into the shot-by-shot consistent damage when she's in play, whereas McCree is a bit more flexible to always be shooting. You don't really need that up against tanks. Like, you need the damage now to hit multiple headshots before the healing cooldowns come online, and Ashe, if you've got the aim to do that, you can keep putting that damage in, then have long periods where you're out of the fight. Burst burst damage, of course, is what you need in Overwatch in order to get kills, and she just brings that in a few different ways.
So it's interesting to me that we're trying to think of things that are particularly strong against Ashe, and speed in general is quite strong, and there's a reason for that. Like any burst character that's mechanically hard, I actually think the fact that she's so difficult is her biggest bad matchup, in that if you're not getting value with her, if you're not getting this TNT value and you're not hitting the shots, then you are essentially doing nothing. And I think heroes and comps that can be on the rest of your team quickly, you know how teams used to counter fire by killing pretty much her entire team before she could leverage her damage. That's slightly true of Ashe as well. The TNT is easy damage, but you know, being able to hit that consistent hit scan burst damage is great if you're hitting it right. It's like Widow kind of. It's fantastic. You're just clicking heads, all that kind of stuff. But if the enemy team's playing dive and they've got flankers in amongst the rest of your team, and your team are just dying too quick for you to be able to get that purchase with that hit scan skill, because she's so hard to play, that's going to sort of give room for other heroes and comps to be around in her era. I mean, that's at least my opinion.
Right. Tracer Genji dive is the strongest thing against Ashe, which might be a breath of fresh air because those heroes felt kind of unplayable in the brawly beatdown Brigitte team comps that just rush at you. But as we're kind of saying, TNT is easier to hit on team comps that stay close together or want to easily W mouse one towards you, because you can just parry back, get an angle for TNT either over the shield or even at their feet and get massive value. But those are a little bit harder to hit on flankers, as well as, unless you are a player like the caliber of Effect, hitting Genji or Tracer with Ashe is going to be quite difficult. Because remember, even though she can fire from the hip, it doesn't do much damage, honestly, and spreads out quite quickly, so hitting a squishy target accurately, spamming from the hip, isn't really a thing. I'd say you'd feel pressure trying to ADS most of the time with her, and if you can't reliably hit a target, it's going to be a struggle. So that means in the medium range engagement against ranged characters, Ashe looks really strong, and she's got the tools to deal with these tanky comps. She can blast away dive tanks as well, but it's up against those small, fast characters that I think she'll struggle with the most.
I mean, I have to say, like, she does have defenses against, say, like a Genji blade or something like that. There was an example that I put in the Effect video from a few days ago where he coach gunned Genji blade away from him. So she has defenses, but does that do enough for the rest of her team, right? There's a lot of weight on her shoulders. I think if you pick, say, Ashe, I think it then follows that you have to pick Mercy, which limits how your team kind of plays. I think you have to play around Ashe as, you certainly have to play around her as like your main damage dealer. And I think that that limits the rest of your team. And if you're not performing, then it's curtains, I'm afraid. I think that's what we're going to see evolving. I can't wait to see the pros play her, though, I have to say, because with all that dexterity in her kit and the playmaking that she can make, the absolute top level is going to be so impressive. There's going to be so many montage moments and big plays made with her that I'm just really excited. I'm really excited about this hero, and I think a lot of people are, because it's a skill hero that's capable of doing so many different things in so many different ways. People have just been yearning for in Overwatch after having an era that's been quite cooldown based and quite shielding and health pool based. I think people are really looking forward to seeing people tearing it up, and I think that's what Ashe does when she's played at her best.
I'd have to agree. Well, guys, that's going to be everything for today's meta discussion. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, because we upload each and every day. So you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO. This has been Eddy. We're from Your Overwatch, and we'll see you guys next time.